For some time now, if you had the know-how and the correct hardware, you would have been able to use a mouse and keyboard on your favourite console games. But the question is, should you be able to? In this video, I'm going to go in depth into the setup as well as the performance of the most popular console mouse and keyboard adapter called the ZIM 4. How does it work? How easy is it to set up? How does it feel? Why do people use it? And is it cheating? Most importantly, should something like this be available? A disclaimer before we start too, this is not a sponsored video in any way, shape or form. I've got no contact with ZIM or any of the other companies I'm going to mention in this video. I just thought that it would be cool to buy one of these devices and see if it's actually any good. And this is an interesting and controversial topic in the multiplayer gaming scene. I see threads about these kind of devices all of the time and they're very polarizing, and I hope that this video sparks up a bit of a discussion and perhaps you'll learn something new. Sony and Microsoft the past couple of years have even teased proper mouse and keyboard support for their consoles, but will we actually ever see it? In the meantime, you'll need a mouse and keyboard translator like the ZIM to do it. So let's start with, should something like this be available? One of the biggest benefits of multiplayer console gaming is that anyone can just sit down on their sofa in comfort, pick up a controller and know that everyone else is on the same playing field. You don't have to worry about frames per second or your graphics settings, or if you've got the best mouse and keyboard. You know it's all even, mostly, but we'll get onto that in a second. I'm not primarily a console gamer and I'm fortunate enough that I have a good PC and good hardware, so I've got a comfortable experience in most games that I play, but that's not the same for everyone, and this can often put you at a big disadvantage in certain games when you're playing on PC. In recent times though, console gamers have had way more options when it comes to controllers than ever before. Custom controllers are nothing new, but with Microsoft recently releasing Elite controllers officially, and companies like Scuf providing the same sort of a service for both Sony and Microsoft consoles, the lines on the playing field are becoming somewhat blurry. These Elite controllers tend to add paddles on the reverse side that are usually duplicates of the face buttons. It's meant to provide a way of pressing a face button without taking your hands off the sticks or the triggers. They also provide trigger locks on the triggers for first-person shooter games, basically halving the depression of the triggers so you can fire that split second faster. Even Razer have been getting in on the action with the custom Raiju controller for PS4 offering something very similar. Will these controllers make you a better player then? Well, the jury is out on that one, but if you're already a very good player, you could easily argue that a tenth of a second here and there could make a difference if that really matters to you. The bottom line is that while most players will be using a standard PS4 controller, not everyone that you come across in a multiplayer lobby will be. So why do people use mouse and keyboard adapters like the ZIM then? It's a big difference from an Elite controller, isn't it? Mostly, I think it comes down to comfort. Often a player who's used to playing with a mouse and keyboard will want to play specific exclusive console games, but they know that they aren't fantastic with a controller, and that makes the experience less enjoyable and more awkward for them. Destiny 1, I think, is a perfect example of that. It's a game that's not available on PC, at least the original game, and so some PC players who wanted to play it didn't want to use a controller and struggle, so instead they will use something like the ZIM. The ZIM 4 is a device that plugs directly into your PlayStation 4 or Xbox via USB. You then connect a PC mouse and a keyboard directly into it, hook the device up to one of your controllers, and the device converts the controller inputs to mouse and keyboard controls. And it's combined with an app that you can get on your phone, PC or tablet, and with that app you can set up profiles for all of the games that you can think of, including presets and specific keyboard and mouse key bindings. We'll get into how it all works and how well it works shortly, but the main point here is, should this sort of thing be allowed? Well, the simple answer is, you can't really stop it, as far as I'm aware. It's not reliant on the game supporting it, it's simply emulating a controller, so it's pretty hard to stop. It's also apparent that Sony, for example, don't seem to have a problem with mouse and keyboard adapters because they actually actively promote a device called the TAC Pro on their official website. And the TAC is actually a mouse combined with a claw-like keyboard that uses a similar system to the ZIM to convert controls. Now this device isn't made by Sony, it's made by a company called Hori, but Sony endorsed it to the point of listing it on their website. I've also used one of these devices and in my opinion the Zim works better overall and offers you much more customization. But the reality is that we're in a day and age where it's only a matter of time, I think, before consoles are actually having proper mouse and keyboard support coded into them. It feels like that we might be moving in that direction, but if we do, you're going to lose that equality that console gaming provides, and you start heading into the same PC territory we talked about before. So let's talk about how you set up the Zim in a bit more detail. It's actually really straightforward. Connect a mouse to the front left USB port on the Zim and keyboard to the port on the front right. And then with the controller USB cable, you can hook up either a PS4 controller to the back or an Xbox controller to the USB port. And then lastly, you connect the Zim itself to the console for power. On PlayStation 4 at least, you have to turn the controller on and it will initialize the Zim. Next, you need a phone, tablet or PC that has Bluetooth support. Turn on your Bluetooth and while your device is searching from devices, hit the little button on the rear of the Zim to turn it into a discovery mode and it should be detected and connect. The next stage is to download the Zim app. This program is what enables you to set up specific profiles for games to make your mouse controls as accurate as possible depending on the game, and it allows you to set up your key bindings as well. And the app is really straightforward. You just pick a game, so let's say Battlefront, hit edit if you want to change the settings like sensitivity, aim down the sight sensitivity and keyboard bindings. There is one important thing though for the Zim to work best. You need to put the DPI of your mouse up to the maximum value, and it also helps to increase the in-game sensitivity up to the maximum value as well. So what about the practicality? Is the device actually any good, and does it give you that nice mouse and keyboard feel that you get on PC? Well, I tried out the Zim on 3 different games: Destiny 1, Battlefield 1 and Battlefront. I had very different experiences on all of them, to be truthful, and it definitely worked differently between them all. Let's start with Battlefield 1. It took me quite some time to get the Zim to where I wanted it to be on Battlefield, and even then I wouldn't say that it was perfect. What you need to understand about the Zim is that you're not just going to plug in a mouse and keyboard and it's going to feel like it does on the PC version. That's not going to happen. It's still got this weird mouse acceleration and smoothing that's extremely hard to get rid of, but you do kind of get used to it after a while. I turned my sensitivity in game up to max, turned off controller acceleration, and overall played around with the settings for a while before I was reasonably happy. In the end, I felt that tracking players and switching targets was much easier for me than using a controller, especially at medium to long distances. Fast movements, however, like turning behind me really quick, was quite tricky. Clearly not as tricky as using a controller, mind you, but it's not as good as you may imagine. I also found that in Battlefield 1, the frames per second drops quite frequently compared to, let's say, Battlefront and Destiny, and as such this had a big effect on the fluidity of the controls with the Zim. Destiny, while only running at 30 frames per second, is at least a constant frame rate, and Battlefront also runs at a constant 60 FPS. That being said, even on the PS4 Pro, I did notice regular frame drops in Battlefield 1, and this affected how the mouse felt. Next, I tried Destiny, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. I found a good setup online, and so I started with that as my base. Overall aiming was okay and tracking was fine, but Destiny has fairly severe aim assist that can't be turned off, and that can be a bit of an odd experience when you're aiming with a mouse. Sprinting also gave a really weird sensation and feeling to the sensitivity, but when I was actually stood aiming, it felt relatively smooth, and after a while I got used to it. I'd say I could even work on the setup a little bit more and get it to a nicer point. And you've probably realised by now that this isn't really an exact science. The Zim, while it may be plug and play, in reality it isn't. It needs a lot of setup work to get it to where it needs to be. The good news is that you can use the app on your phone on the fly to tweak things if you want to. Destiny was the game that I felt I had the least advantage though over the other players when using the Zim. It just made it a bit more comfortable for me. I think that the frame rate, heavy aim assist and low field of view all attributed to this. And then lastly I tried Battlefront, and honestly this is the one that I felt had the most natural and best feeling out of the box. As soon as I loaded the default Battlefront profile, console, I had to change very little to get it to feel really good. Apart from, of course, just tweaking the sensitivity, everything was already feeling pretty neat. That did surprise me a little bit as to why Battlefront felt so much nicer than Battlefield, considering they're both on the same engine. Perhaps the third-person nature of the game makes it a bit easier, but out of the box, the Zim will have you popping people's heads with lasers across the map. Sure, it's not going to be quite as good as it may feel using a mouse on PC, but I was pleasantly surprised overall. Using the Zim on Battlefront definitely gave me a significant advantage over everyone else using a controller in the game with me. Having a constant 60 frames per second was a big deal in how nice the mouse felt, switching targets rapidly, tracking, aiming for headshots. It was just way easier for me than using a controller. Honestly, it felt like I was playing against bots sometimes and was almost too easy. The important thing to remember with the Zim is that some games simply work better than others. Console games aren't designed to work with a mouse and keyboard, and as such all sorts of code goes into making sure that they work as well as they can with analog sticks, with a healthy dose of aim assist thrown into the mix. With that in mind, the Zim is trying to take those signals and convert them into something that a mouse can utilise. Some games just have a better default system that suits a mouse and keyboard, and some don't. Frostbite engine games certainly have a good system in place when it comes to that, but Destiny 1 on the other hand needs a ton of tweaking. I was fortunate that I knew a good setup like I said, but I know for a fact that using the default setup in Destiny is not very pleasant, and that's the problem. You really need to spend some time setting the games up, it's so important. I'm primarily a PC gamer and I rarely play multiplayer games on console, but could I use a device like this day to day if I was a console gamer? Possibly. On Destiny, for instance, a game that's mostly infantry combat in first person, I had it set up pretty nice. And with Destiny 2 coming out, could I see people using it to play on PS4 and Xbox? Well, there's a good chance of it. Tracking enemies, especially in PvP, would be a lot easier, and for me personally, I'm just naturally better with a mouse than a controller, as I've spent most of my life playing PC games. And although it does feel a bit odd at times with the acceleration and aim assist, you do get somewhat used to it after a while. Just don't expect a perfect solution. There are some buttons and some game mechanics that don't work very well with it though, like vehicles or stationary weapons in Battlefield for example, so I'd probably switch to the controller if I was in a plane or a tank. In conclusion, as a PC gamer, in my opinion, all three games that I tried with the Zim offered me more comfort and accuracy than what I'm capable of as an average controller user. It's not perfect and there are hitches, but it made the experience of playing those games on console more enjoyable for me as I was more confident in my abilities using a mouse and keyboard. But do we really want consoles to have people utilising a mouse and keyboard and having an advantage over controller players? I imagine the core multiplayer console players would be vehemently against that, but then some people who aren't great with a controller of course would disagree. Without a doubt though, a mouse offers you more precision than an analog stick ever will, so some people would consider this cheating. Consoles are supposed to be a level playing field like I mentioned earlier. People will use these devices to gain an advantage in multiplayer shooters. If they're more comfortable with a mouse, they're going to get more kills, they're going to win more games, and they're going to feel better about themselves. The game director of Overwatch, as you all know the game's available on console and PC, Jeff Kaplan his name is, has actually chimed in on this debate of fairness in console games recently too, and he said that the Overwatch team objects to the use of mouse and keyboard on console. We've contacted both first-party console manufacturers and expressed our concern about the use of mouse and keyboard and input conversion devices. We've lobbied and will continue to lobby for first-party console manufacturers to either disallow mouse and keyboard and input conversion devices or openly and easily support mouse and keyboard for all players. It's an interesting point that he makes here. If these relatively expensive third-party mouse and keyboard adapters for console can't be stopped, then perhaps Sony and Microsoft should release their own official versions that are easy to use and supported across the board. I mean, looking to the future, can you imagine a game like Battlegrounds, which we know is coming out for Xbox and potentially PlayStation 4? Using a mouse and keyboard in that game is going to give you an absolutely huge advantage over someone who's using a controller. And that's because of the nature of the game. You've got very long distance engagements where you have to do pinpoint shooting, and it's hard hard to do that with an analog stick. And not just the shooting either, you've got stuff like the loot management and inventory system. You can quickly move stuff around into multiple places with a mouse, but that's going to be a lot harder when you're working with a controller. So it really depends on the particular game in a lot of circumstances. Like I said with Destiny though, I don't feel like it gave me a massive advantage because of the field of view, the frame rate, and also the massive amount of aim assist that you get in that game. And I've watched some players on Twitch and YouTube who use a controller on Destiny who can get ridiculously good. But on the flip side to this, I don't think that everyone who uses a mouse and keyboard adapter for console is doing it to try and gain an advantage over other players. It's much more about a comfort and familiarity thing for a lot of players, especially in single player and co-op games. Would you care if people are using it in those kind of situations? There's an argument for both sides there, definitely. It's an interesting debate, and I think if Microsoft or Sony ever officially have their own mouse and keyboard products working well on console games, the discussion is going to get far more complex. One day, perhaps we could reach a point where consoles have mouse and keyboard only lobbies and controller only lobbies. Hypothetically speaking, I think that could potentially happen. So that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you did like it, give me a thumbs up. This video took ages to put together, so it would really help with shares and recommendations if you give a thumbs up there. If you didn't enjoy it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one.